Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we are recording it for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. You're welcome to post questions and comments during this session, and we'll try to answer them online. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tom Temin, host and managing editor of the Federal Drive on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Lawrence Reed, Assistant Director for Security Operations at the Justice Department. Chad Sheridan is Chief Information Officer at the Agriculture Department's Risk Management Agency. Dr. Barry West is Senior Advisor and Senior Accountable Official for Risk Management at the Homeland Security Department. Peter Tran is General Manager and Senior Director for Worldwide Advanced Cyber Defense Practice at RSA. And Peter Schauwacker, Director of Security Intelligence Solutions at Optiv. Good to have you all here. And this is such a wonderful topic to talk about cybersecurity because it's always changing. There's always something new. We have hybrid environments to a much greater degree in the federal government than we did even a year ago, let alone 5 years ago. Some of the new and lurid threats that have hit organizations around the world, I think the last one narrowly missed the federal government, but a lot of the industries that we interact with were affected. And so, and there's more data analysis as part of the cybersecurity strategy, and we're going to talk about all of those issues today. But why don't we start with our government folks by just getting an idea of what contemporary continuous monitoring looks like. What are we doing now that might be different from a few years ago when this whole concept got started? And also continuous diagnostics and mitigation, kind of the small sibling, I guess, of continuous monitoring. Dr. West, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. Tom, thanks for having me on the show. I'd say we're headed for, in Department of Homeland Security, is a more federated approach and more collaboration as the components. At DHS we have 22 components. I'd say what's different today versus monitoring from 3-5 years ago is that collaboration and situational awareness that we're sharing between our various security operations centers and getting the information in people's hands quicker. Between those various entities. Also, as far as the CDM, I think that it's been a great idea. I think it's slowly getting a little bit of momentum, but the real key is the implementation process. I think there's a lot of value that we're going to see as far as eliminating redundancies and trying to get our hands around more commonalities and aligning with our budgets better, but it's going to take a little while for that to mature.
And Lawrence Reed from Justice, you have kind of a similar issue of DHS, a couple of big components, a lot of small components.
Yeah, we do. We have actually a little over 40 components when you count them all, a bunch small and a few big ones that everybody probably knows. So we have that federated environment to a large degree as well, and I think that's probably common across a lot of the federal government. So the monitoring today, that's a little different than the past couple of years, or say 3 to 5 years ago. Speed is a big part of that. With cloud and some of the other technologies and the way the adversaries are working today, you have to be able to respond almost immediately. There's no, get an alert and work through a 2 or 3 hour process. That just doesn't work anymore. So that's one of the things we're focused on is getting the whole process, start to finish, to be a lot faster.
So that implies the need for more automation, orchestration of these things.
Right, and you need the automation and the orchestration. You also need the data to be there when that process starts. So collecting a lot of data from a lot of different places across the enterprise is a big piece of that. As Barry said, on the CDM front, it is a good idea, and the government's pretty big, so making it move has been a challenge for DHS, no doubt. But we've done a few of those ideas within the department already, pushing them out in terms of scoring and dashboards and some of those things. So they've helped us a lot in terms of the risk management and getting that profile down, the risk profile a little bit lower. So that's been pretty good for us.
Okay, and Chad at Agriculture.
So I'd like to echo what everybody else said around the collaboration piece. I think one of the best things that came out of the 2015 cyber sprint was this idea of we're all in this together. And so the types of things that we were being asked to do at the Department of Agriculture did not happen, from the top only. It happened as a collaboration between the components and the top. And we've continued that in how we communicate about incidents, how we communicate about issues. So if I've got something going on, I'm making a call to the department CISO, my staff is making a call to his staff, so that lines of communication, so we're working together. So that's a good part. The difficult part is we haven't taken that increased communication and collaboration to a true concept of operations where, hey, this is what you do, this is what you're funded to do, this is what I'm doing. And if it leads me into CDM, part of our problem with implementation is what really is the concept of operations we're going to use government-wide? What is really the concept of operation we're going to use at a component agency or at a CFO Act agency? How does that work together? Do our budgets align with that? Have we trained our people for that? Do the tools actually then integrate with that model? And that's where we're struggling.
Yeah, so let me ask Peter Schauwacker of Optiv about that question. You have to have a strategy, and it has to align with what your business is and what resources you have and what the threats are. A lot of vectors come into play there. What do you see across industry and also across government from your perch how they're getting at that whole need to integrate and make sure there's some coherence to the strategy?
Yeah, well, I think you have to be realistic about what you mean by monitoring, what you mean by continuous. I think what people sometimes take for granted is this idea that there's going to be eyes on glass and people watching stuff. And that's true to some degree, but that's always punctuated. That's what we call hunting, where people sit down at systems that can monitor the network, or they, dig into logs and look for evidence of an attack. But again, that's not something you do all the time. There's another kind of monitoring that's sort of the traditional SOC model, Security Operations Center, where you wait for events to come out of whatever instrumentation you have, intrusion detection systems, SIMs, secure intelligence systems, things like that, and then respond and execute some kind of process, usually involving lots of people and lots of talking. The trouble with all of that stuff is that the threats are such that the bad guys scale linearly, right? They move too fast, and they're able to affect too much risk, and so there simply isn't time for people to handle this stuff. So we've, a couple of times, I've heard about automation here. We really have to drive automation much harder. We can't wait for people to catch up. There will never be enough people.
Okay, yeah, good point. So that continuous has to be maybe not the people's eyeballs continuous, but the tools in place that you have, they're what's continuous.
Monitoring, monitoring has to go in quotes. It's not really done by people. It can't be.
So it's the difference between radar and binoculars, if you will.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
All right, and Peter Tran from RSA, what's your view of what we should be doing?
I have a bit of an edgier view. And from a con-ops perspective, and then the commercial industry has strategy, I would consider what's happening not only in the private industry but in government is security arrested decay. That meaning we've made investments in infrastructure and they're aging, and we're trying to transform that. But somewhat like walking into a museum, right? It's there, it's preserved, and we're trying to make the best of it. And when we're monitoring hunting, there's a difference between hunting and then actually taking the action on what you've hunted. If your sensors or senses are off, even one slight delta, what you've just hunted for becomes irrelevant to your action. So from a cyber defense perspective and continuous monitoring with programs like Einstein 1, 2, and 3, where in the cases great initiatives, and we're working closely from an industry perspective to do that. We're well beyond figuring out what the left hand is doing with the right hand, and technology as it's for risk and the context by which we are mission driven. So we have our procurement cycles in the federal government. There's more private industry collaboration now than we've ever seen before. So the transition between old security, new security, old Coke, new Coke, right? I mean, is it going to work? And we're at that pivotal point, moving in that direction.
Interesting. So that seems to talk to the issues around security, information, and event management. Maybe that's the old paradigm, or is that something that's updatable? I mean, is that something common now in federal agencies?
I think it is, but again, our limitations right now are, we've had a SIM for a while now, and we probably are due to refresh it, but the point is we don't have the people that are there. It doesn't currently have the level of automation, And we've also seemed to work from the methodology of I'm rolling all this information up and my big brother is going to help me determine where my problems are. And it reminds me, I had a great conversation maybe a couple years back with the folks at NASA Ames, and they built their own open source stack of monitoring tools because they didn't have any money to buy the fancy tools. And what they did, it wasn't a matter of getting the information in the hands of leaders. It was a matter of getting the information in their hands of the people to make the system administrators. So they were working at a peer level to a point where they were using almost a social media type effort to say, hey, you guys have problems. And so all the sysadmins would see how each other was stacking up against you. And sysadmins are very prideful folks. And so if they're having problems in this one area of vulnerabilities, that peer pressure was driving change. And so getting the hands of the information that people were actually going to drive the change to make your network better, the people who are going to investigate, that's what we need to focus on. It's great to have dashboards, it's great to have leadership involvement, but we need the people who are actually going to do the work to get that information in a very timely manner to protect ourselves.
So I wanted to, I'm sorry, Dr. Weiss. So a SIM, I think we could all agree on that. A SIM is only as good as the data and the data freshness that's going into the SIM. So it's not like we're saying SIM is outdated or it can't be innovated and we can't bridge SIM to be SIM with analytics and that capability. Aging of the data, DHS, DOJ, USDA, you have Intel capabilities there and you're collecting so much data that it ages faster than you can even analyze it or even fed into your SIM environment. You can't take a data-driven decision approach for your action. So you're hunting based on aged threat intelligence or threat analytical data. So that's the real danger.
You're looking in the rearview mirror to try to find out.
You don't even have a rearview mirror, right? It's like you don't even have a black box in the airplane, so you can't even wait till the plane crashes until you can check the black box. That's where we're going if we're not doing the appropriate convergence of technology, process, and staffing appropriately.
Barry?
Tom, one of the key focus areas in the new cyber executive order is strengthening the IT workforce. And I think that really plays into this because the roles are really changing. I mean, we're still going to have the traditional systems managers, network managers, but we're seeing more from, say, a business analyst, the people out there, the data analysts that are out there, the scrum masters. Those folks really need to have that cyber background. They don't necessarily have to go out and have a CISSP, but they really need to know what they're looking for in their everyday jobs and really have that key relationship with security, with the IT.
Yeah, because you're named as the senior accountable official for risk management, so that sounds like heavy duty.
Each department had to name one individual. The secretary had to name one, and I'm the lucky one. So it's that coordination among all the components, and having someone out there that I can also go to in dealing with their risk management plans.
So what I'm hearing is the need for almost immediate knowledge of what's happening, but maybe it's happening so fast that without automated tools it doesn't do you any good because you're dealing with something that's already passed and it's too late.
Well, it depends on what we're looking for. Right? If we're just looking for the threats or things happening, we're never going to catch that. I mean, to your point, Peter, we're never going to get that because now we're relying on the currentness, the relevance of our intel information. We need to be looking at what events are happening, what are our users doing. That's another piece, but more importantly is move that security piece to the left, as Barry was talking about, right, is how are we monitoring that we have secure systems, that our code is secure, that we've got intel around the third-party code that we're using if it's open source, or frankly all the vendors use third-party code. So if we have a provenance like we do in supply chain management of the code we're using, that we're building it secure, now I'm putting security in at the front end and I'm not trying to monitor it on the back end.
I mean, so much of good security really comes down. I think this is kind of what Barry's getting to, is having people who have enough of an understanding of security to do good systems administration. I mean, there's this school that we all go to in security called the SANS Institute, and it stands for Systems Administration Network Security, and almost everybody who goes to these classes forgets the first two letters. They don't they completely let it go. For example, when people ask me what's the best defense against ransomware, it's very simple. Have backups. boring stuff, not really about responding to anything, but having a little bit of foresight to set up this thing that's been in every production operating system for, I don't know how long. It's called incremental backups, not a big deal. In terms of response, I think the opposite is the case, and that it's not just about what we hear so much of the time, which is we're going to like churn out like 1 million CISSPs, or people have enormous numbers of people. That is not the answer. The answer is you need to have fewer people who know how to build automation, who understand tools, so that when you're dealing with things that are fast moving, and they're not campaigns, right? Campaigns you find through analytics. Campaigns you find through manual analysis and smart people who understand threats. But the bulk of the response that we need to do is really about building the tools that we need and the instrumentation and understanding how to transform knowledge of threats into that, rather than lots and lots of bodies.
In a way, that gets back, what you're saying gets back to the earliest days of continuous monitoring, which is to making sure your patches were there, which gets to the issue of making sure you're operating secure systems fundamentally.
Right.
Lawrence?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think the workforce thing is a big deal to try to get that up to speed. And I think focusing security outside of the traditional sysadmins, at least from the business value part of it, is going to be a big deal as we educate a broader spectrum of people, get the business analysts, get the mission owners at least aware and knowledgeable so you can have the right conversations with them, will help us prioritize in a way that doesn't make the problem so big we can't solve it, right? Because having everything be the #1 priority, you're never going to get anywhere that way because it's just too big of a problem. You got to be able to break it up. The only people that can really make that kind of a decision is the mission owners and the business owners.
All right, on that note, we will take a short break. This discussion is Advanced Cyber Monitoring, sponsored by RSA and Optiv, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.